On November 22, 1963, the world changed forever. In the heart of Dallas, Texas, a motorcade carried the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, through Dealey Plaza. Crowds of Americans lined the streets, waving flags and cheering. At 12:37 p.m., 3 shots rang out. Just moments later, the young and charismatic president lay mortally wounded. By 1 p.m., he was declared dead. But though JFK died that day, the mystery surrounding his assassination has lived on for over 60 years. This is the story of what happened before, during, and after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a story of political intrigue, shadowy figures, and questions that have never truly been answered. Chapter 1. The President and the Times. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a symbol of hope and change. Elected in 1960, he was the youngest elected president in American history. With his charm, eloquence, and idealism, he inspired millions. His administration, often referred to as Camelot, brought a youthful energy to the White House. But behind the image, Kennedy's presidency was marked by intense Cold War tensions. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and ongoing civil rights struggles created enemies on both domestic and foreign fronts. The CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, anti-Castro exiles, and even elements within his own government all had reasons, real or imagined, to be unhappy with him. Chapter 2, November 22, 1963. The day of the assassination. It was a sunny day in Dallas. Kennedy had arrived in Texas for a political trip aimed at uniting Democratic Party factions before the 1964 election. Riding in a blue 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible limousine, Kennedy sat beside his wife, Jacqueline. Texas Governor John Connally and his wife rode in front. As the motorcade turned from Houston Street onto Elm Street in Dealey Plaza, shots were fired. The first shot reportedly missed. The second struck both Kennedy and Governor Connally. The third and final bullet fatally struck Kennedy in the head. Panic erupted. The motorcade sped to Parkland Memorial Hospital, but Kennedy was beyond help. At 1 p.m., doctors pronounced him dead. At 2:38 p.m., Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president aboard Air Force One, with Jackie Kennedy at his side, still in her blood-stained pink suit. Chapter 3. The Arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald. Just hours after the assassination, a 24-year-old former Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in a Dallas movie theater. He had allegedly killed a police officer, J.D. Tippit, shortly after the assassination. By the evening, he was charged with the murder of President Kennedy. Oswald had spent time in the Soviet Union and was an open supporter of Fidel Castro. He had defected to the USSR in 1959 and returned to the U.S. in 1962 with a Russian wife. He was known to be erratic, politically extreme, and obsessed with leftist causes. When questioned by reporters, Oswald famously said, "I'm just a patsy." Before he could be tried on November 24, 1963, Oswald was shot and killed on live television by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. Ruby claimed he was avenging Kennedy, but his mafia ties led many to believe that Oswald's murder was a cover-up, silencing the only suspect. Chapter 4. The Warren Commission and Official Narrative. In 1964, President Johnson appointed the Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, to investigate the assassination. After 10 months, the commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. He fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. There was no evidence of a conspiracy, foreign or domestic. The report became the official narrative for decades. Yet it was met with skepticism almost immediately. One of the most controversial elements was the magic bullet theory, which suggested that one bullet caused 7 wounds to both Kennedy and Connolly, entering Kennedy's back, exiting his throat, entering Connolly's back, shattering a rib, exiting his chest, and finally lodging in his thigh, all while remaining largely intact. To critics, this defied logic and physics. Chapter 5: Doubts, Discrepancies, and the Rise of Conspiracy. As years passed, more inconsistencies emerged. Many witnesses reported hearing shots from the grassy knoll, not the book depository. The Zapruder film, captured by a bystander, shows Kennedy's head snapping backward, suggesting a shot from the front. Some medical staff at Parkland Hospital claimed Kennedy had a wound in the front of his neck, inconsistent with the lone shooter theory. Jack Ruby's connections to organized crime raised questions about his motives and orders. Over the decades, alternative theories have proliferated. 1. The Mafia. Kennedy's crackdown on organized crime angered mob bosses. Some believe the Mafia orchestrated the killing and used Oswald, and later Ruby, to execute and cover up the act. 2. The CIA. After the Bay of Pigs disaster, the CIA reportedly viewed Kennedy as weak. Some believe rogue elements in the agency acted to remove a president they saw as a threat to national security and their power. 3. Anti-Castro Cubans. Furious at Kennedy for failing to support their revolution against Fidel Castro, some Cuban exiles allegedly plotted revenge, possibly with help from the CIA or Mafia. 4. The Soviet Union. Given Oswald's time in the USSR, some theorized a KGB plot, but this would have likely led to a massive Cold War escalation. 5. The military-industrial complex. Kennedy had plans to reduce U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Some believe this threatened defense contractors and military interests, a motive for assassination. Chapter 6: The House Select Committee on Assassinations. In the late 1970s, amid renewed public pressure and revelations from the Watergate scandal, Congress reopened the investigation. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, concluded in 1979 that Oswald fired the shots that killed Kennedy, but Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Acoustic evidence suggested a second gunman may have fired from the grassy knoll. Yet this report, too, was inconclusive. Later scientific analyses questioned the validity of the acoustic evidence. The mystery deepened rather than resolved. Chapter 7: The Secret Files and Declassification Battles. In 1992, following Oliver Stone's film JFK, Congress passed the JFK Records Act, mandating the release of all assassination-related documents. Millions of pages have been released since, but some files remain classified even today. The continued secrecy fuels speculation. What are the U.S. government and intelligence agencies still hiding? Why would information about a 1963 assassination need protection 60 years later? In recent years, presidents have delayed full declassification, citing national security. But critics argue that delaying transparency only deepens suspicion. Chapter 8: The Legacy and the Unanswered Questions. The assassination of JFK wasn't just the murder of a man. It was the murder of a vision, of a more hopeful, peaceful, and united America. For many, it marked the end of innocence and the beginning of distrust in institutions. Polls consistently show that over 60% of Americans believe there was a conspiracy. The identity of the conspirators remains unknown. Did Oswald act alone? Was he a manipulated pawn? Did the truth die with Jack Ruby? The JFK assassination has become the ultimate American mystery. Books, films, documentaries, and podcasts continue to dissect every frame, every bullet, every moment of that dark day in Dallas. But perhaps the most haunting truth is this: we may never know the full story. Conclusion: why the JFK assassination still matters. The assassination of John F. Kennedy wasn't just a tragic event. It reshaped American history, trust in government, and the way we view power. It exposed the vulnerabilities of even the most powerful figures and the darkness that can exist behind political curtains. More than 60 years later, we are still seeking the truth. And maybe that's the most important legacy: a continued quest for transparency, accountability, and justice. Because if the truth about JFK's death remains hidden, what else lies in the shadows? Chapter 9: Shadowy Figures and Disappearing Evidence. Beyond the main suspects, a number of curious individuals appeared in Dealey Plaza that day, and their presence has fueled decades of speculation. One of the most puzzling was the so-called babushka lady. Caught on film holding a camera close to the assassination site, she appeared calm and focused amid the chaos. Her footage, if it still exists, could offer a crucial angle of the fatal shots. Yet her identity remains a mystery, and the film was never recovered. Another strange figure was known as the Umbrella Man. On a perfectly clear Texas day, he was the only person holding an open umbrella. As Kennedy's limousine approached, the man raised the umbrella into the air, an action some interpret as a signal to trigger the shots. Though he later claimed it was a symbolic protest, many researchers find his story unconvincing. Then there's the matter of missing or manipulated evidence. Key police radio recordings contain unexplained gaps. Photographs and X-rays taken during Kennedy's autopsy allegedly differ from early medical accounts in Dallas. A nurse at Parkland Hospital once testified that a bullet fell out of Kennedy's back, but it vanished before it could be officially documented. Such irregularities cast long shadows over the official story. Chapter 10: Jack Ruby. Silencer or Patriot? Jack Ruby, the man who murdered Oswald, was no average civilian acting on emotion. He owned a nightclub frequented by mobsters and had established contacts within the criminal underworld. Some accounts link Ruby to figures within the CIA and FBI. Despite his claim that he acted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy from a painful trial, many believe his true purpose was to silence Oswald permanently. Following his arrest, Ruby made bizarre and cryptic statements. He hinted that powerful forces were behind the assassination and that his own life was in danger. "You won't ever know the real truth," he told a journalist shortly before his death from cancer in 1967. He tried multiple times to testify before Congress, but insisted on being moved to Washington for protection, a request that was never granted. Ruby's motivations remain contested, but one fact is clear. With Oswald dead, the public was denied a trial and possibly the full truth. Chapter 11: Witness Deaths and the Convenient Coincidences. In the years following the assassination, numerous witnesses and individuals connected to the case died under strange or violent circumstances. While some of these deaths were undoubtedly coincidental, the sheer number has given rise to the term the Kennedy curse. Journalist Penn Jones Jr. compiled a list of over 100 people linked to the case who died suddenly in the 1960s and 1970s. This included suicides, accidents, and even murders. Among them, Dorothy Kilgallen, a prominent reporter who interviewed Jack Ruby and promised to blow the case wide open, was found dead in her apartment. David Ferry, a known associate of Oswald, was found dead just days before he was set to testify. George de Mohrenschildt, Oswald's mentor and friend, allegedly committed suicide moments before a scheduled interview with House investigators. Although skeptics argue that large investigations inevitably involve many people and thus many natural deaths, the pattern has kept the flames of suspicion alive. Chapter 12: The Deep State Theory. A modern theory that has gained traction links the assassination to what is now called the Deep State, a shadow network of military, intelligence, and corporate interests operating independently of elected officials. Supporters of this view argue that Kennedy was undermining powerful elements within his own government. He had expressed a desire to dismantle the CIA after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He signed National Security Action Memorandum 263, planning to withdraw U.S. forces from Vietnam, a move that could cost defense contractors billions. He was cracking down on the Federal Reserve and challenging oil and steel giants. To these interests, JFK may have appeared more as a threat than a leader. And unlike in the movies, the real world rarely reveals the villains so clearly. Chapter 13: Cultural Impact and Endless Fascination. The JFK assassination changed not just politics, but culture. It created a template for modern conspiracy theories, an enduring suspicion that major world events may be shaped by forces the public never sees. Movies like JFK, 1991, directed by Oliver Stone, reignited public debate and inspired the passage of the JFK Records Act. Countless books, documentaries, and podcasts continue to explore every angle of the assassination. Why? Because people don't believe the story is complete. To this day, polls consistently reveal that a majority of Americans reject the lone gunman theory. The idea that the truth remains hidden beneath classified files, secret agendas, and buried evidence resonates far beyond Dealey Plaza. Chapter 14: The Final Irony. John F. Kennedy once said, "The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society." He warned against secret societies and unchecked power, and yet his death remains shrouded in secrecy. The ultimate irony is that the man who stood for openness became the center of one of history's most enduring mysteries. His legacy is celebrated, but the circumstances of his death still cast a long, dark shadow over America's past. Epilogue: Why the Truth Still Matters. Over 6 decades later, the wounds of that day in Dallas remain unhealed, not just because of the man who was lost, but because the truth may have been buried with him. A democracy cannot thrive without trust, and trust cannot exist without truth. Whether or not we ever uncover the full story, the assassination of John F. Kennedy continues to ask us difficult, urgent questions. Who really holds power? What happens when the truth is inconvenient? And how much are we, the public, willing to forget? The quest for answers continues, not just for history's sake, but for the future of every free society. Chapter 15: The 21st Century. New Revelations and Renewed Secrecy. As the decades passed, new generations of researchers, investigators, and declassified documents brought fresh attention to the JFK case. The 1992 JFK Records Act had set a deadline. All remaining classified documents were to be released by October 26, 2017. However, when that date arrived, not everything came to light. President Donald Trump delayed the release of hundreds of files, citing concerns from intelligence agencies. Later, in 2021 and 22, President Joe Biden released additional records, but still not all. This continued resistance has only deepened suspicion. Why, after more than 60 years, does any document related to a 1963 murder of a sitting U.S. president remain confidential? What are the agencies so afraid the public might discover? Some speculate that the files could reveal not the direct culprits, but institutional failures, or worse, complicity at high levels. Others believe the files may implicate foreign governments, domestic intelligence networks, or even international allies. Whatever the truth, the lingering secrecy undermines the government's credibility and fuels an ever-growing fire of speculation. Chapter 16: JFK's Enemies Within. To understand why so many conspiracy theories endure, one must look at Kennedy's enemies, not overseas, but within the American establishment. He had publicly clashed with Allen Dulles, the former CIA director whom he fired after the Bay of Pigs disaster, yet who was then appointed to the Warren Commission. J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime FBI director who kept extensive surveillance on both JFK and Martin Luther King Jr., big oil executives frustrated with Kennedy's proposed elimination of the oil depletion allowance. Wall Street interests, nervous about his plans to regulate monopolies and finance. Kennedy also supported monetary reform, including Executive Order 109, which allowed the U.S. Treasury to issue silver-backed certificates, potentially challenging the Federal Reserve's control over currency. Taken together, these conflicts paint a picture not of a president casually killed by a lone extremist, but of a leader who threatened entrenched systems of power and may have paid the ultimate price. Chapter 17: Alternate Investigations and Grassroots Researchers. In the absence of a universally accepted official account, citizen researchers and independent investigators have become the true historians of the JFK assassination. From Mark Lane's early book, Rush to Judgment, to the explosive research of Jim Marrs, James Douglas, and David Talbot, the search for truth has never died. These voices challenged the mainstream narrative and forced major media outlets to reconsider their positions. Modern technology has also enabled reanalysis of film footage, ballistics data, and audio recordings. Computer modeling, forensic science, and artificial intelligence tools are now being used to re-examine evidence in ways that were once impossible. Yet, even with all this, no definitive consensus has emerged. Instead, what we have is a landscape of plausible theories, and one glaring absence: certainty. Chapter 18: A Nation Haunted. The assassination of John F. Kennedy left a wound in the American psyche that never truly healed. It signaled the end of an era, of optimism, of innocence, of belief in uncorrupted democracy. What followed in its wake were some of the darkest chapters in modern U.S. history: the escalation of the Vietnam War, the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, the Watergate scandal, a growing belief that the truth can be hidden indefinitely. The phrase conspiracy theory, once a neutral term, became weaponized in the post-JFK era, used to discredit dissent and discourage investigation. But when a nation is left with unanswered questions about something so profound, how can people not question the story they've been told? Chapter 19: Remembering the Man, Not Just the Mystery. Amid the theories and speculation, it's easy to forget the man at the center of it all. John F. Kennedy was not perfect. He was a human being, flawed like any other. But he was also a symbol of courage, vision, and the belief that politics could be a force for good. He challenged Americans to ask what you can do for your country. He faced down nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He advocated for peace, civil rights, and the exploration of space. His assassination was not just a political event. It was a deep emotional rupture, a moment frozen in collective memory. That moment continues to resonate because JFK represented something rare in politics, a leader who inspired hope while facing down enormous pressure. That he was struck down in his prime only magnified his legacy. Final chapter: A question without an answer. In the end, the assassination of John F. Kennedy remains a question with no final answer, a riddle wrapped in mystery, shrouded in contradiction. Was Oswald truly a lone gunman, or merely a pawn in a much larger operation? Was Jack Ruby driven by emotion or by orders? Did the U.S. government fail, or did elements within it succeed in hiding the truth? We may never know with absolute certainty. But what we do know is this: truth matters. And as long as people continue to ask questions, dig through archives, and challenge official narratives, the hope remains that one day the full truth will come to light. Until then, the words of the slain president still echo. The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Let us never settle for myth when the truth is within reach.
The assassination of John F. Kennedy was not simply the loss of a charismatic leader. It was a seismic event that fractured the American psyche and sowed the seeds for a new era, one defined by suspicion, skepticism, and a relentless search for hidden truths. In the aftermath, a profound cultural shift occurred. Where once the majority of Americans placed their faith in government institutions and accepted official narratives, now doubt began to take root. The story no longer ended with the words of a press secretary or a news anchor. Instead, a new question echoed through living rooms and across kitchen tables. What really happened? This was the dawn of modern conspiracy culture. For the first time, millions of ordinary citizens scrutinized not just what the government did, but what it claimed to do. The assassination became a template for questioning power, fueling a hunger for answers that could not be easily satisfied. The term conspiracy theorist entered the national vocabulary, at first a label of derision, but soon a badge worn by those unwilling to accept surface explanations. The boundaries between fact and speculation blurred, and the space between them filled with possibility and paranoia. This new attitude did not confine itself to Dallas or to the events of November 1963. It spilled over into every major crisis and scandal that followed. Watergate showed that the highest office in the land was not immune to deception. The Iran-Contra affair exposed the shadowy corridors of clandestine policy. The tragedies of September 11, 2001, and the confusion of the COVID-19 pandemic, each in their turn, reignited the same old questions. Who benefits? Who is really in control? What aren't we being told? In each case, the specter of hidden forces lingered. Was history being shaped by unseen hands? Was the official story just a convenient fiction? The Kennedy assassination provided the script for a generation, and for every generation since, to challenge, to doubt, and to demand more from those in power. The legacy was clear. Never trust blindly, never accept the obvious, and always look for the cracks in the surface. But the ripples from that terrible day in Dallas didn't stop at America's borders. Across the world, the assassination of a Western president became a symbol of vulnerability, of intrigue, and of the sometimes fatal consequences of power. In Europe, Kennedy was admired as a youthful, visionary leader, eager for dialogue, and committed to easing the tension of the Cold War. In Latin America and Asia, his promise of a new era of international cooperation resonated deeply. When he was killed, shockwaves traveled across continents. Some wondered whether foreign adversaries, the Soviet KGB, Cuban intelligence, might have played a role. Others saw the assassination as an entirely American tragedy, a symptom of internal corruption and betrayal. Regardless of the theories, the message was unmistakable. Even the most powerful, the most beloved, the most protected could fall victim to forces beyond their control.
Kennedy's death became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of democracy and the ever-present danger of conspiracies, real or imagined. Around the world, leaders recalibrated their sense of security. Citizens learned to question not just their own governments, but the global order. In the uneasy years that followed, the shadow of Dealey Plaza stretched across oceans and ideologies. Today, Dealey Plaza is more than just an intersection in Dallas. It is a living crime scene, a pilgrimage site for believers and skeptics alike.
Tourists trace the route of the presidential motorcade, pausing at the painted X's that mark the fatal shots. The Texas School Book Depository, once an ordinary warehouse, has been transformed into a museum, a monument to both history and mystery. Visitors peer from the sixth-floor window where Lee Harvey Oswald was said to have fired his rifle. They stand on the infamous grassy knoll, the patch of ground that has inspired decades of debate and countless theories. From any vantage point, the scene is hauntingly unchanged, suspended in time. The city has grown and changed, but this small plaza remains frozen, echoing with the questions and uncertainties of that day. There is a peculiar energy in Dealey Plaza, a sense of unfinished business. It is as if the ground itself remembers, holding tight to secrets and suspicions that have never been fully resolved. Here, the line between history and myth blurs, and the search for truth feels urgent, personal, and endless. Despite the passage of time and the mountain of investigation, millions of documents, thousands of witnesses, decades of analysis, one element remains conspicuously present: silence. There is the silence of officials who refuse to answer hard questions, of agencies that continue to redact and withhold, of witnesses who vanished or whose voices were never heard. Most haunting of all is the silence at the heart of the case, the absence of resolution, of justice, of finality. No one has ever stood trial for the assassination of John F. Kennedy. No confession has surfaced to tie together the tangled threads of evidence. The case remains, officially, what it has always been: a collection of fragments, a puzzle with missing pieces, an archive of silence. In the void where justice should reside, only uncertainty lingers.
And so, the imagination turns to the greatest what-if of all. What if John F. Kennedy had lived? Would the Vietnam War have escalated or ended sooner? Would the civil rights movement have advanced more quickly or encountered new obstacles? Would entrenched interests, whether in the intelligence community, organized crime, or big business, have been exposed and reined in? Would America have become a more peaceful, more just nation?
These counterfactuals can never be answered with certainty. But one truth is undeniable. The assassination changed the trajectory of history. The tragedy is not only what happened, but what was lost. The possibility of a second term, the hope for a less turbulent Cold War, the dream of a different America. In the decades since, presidents have come and gone. The world has grown smaller and faster, connected by technologies Kennedy could scarcely have imagined. Yet across all those years, one thing endures: the desire to know the truth. Perhaps this is the enduring legacy of November 22nd, 1963. Not just the loss of a president, but the birth of a movement. A refusal to accept easy answers. An insistence that truth matters, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is elusive. So the questions persist. Was it just Oswald? Or was it something more? And will we, as a society, ever summon the courage and the will to finally face the answers? The search continues, as vital now as it was over 60 years ago.
In the annals of American history, few figures have provoked as much fascination, speculation, and enduring controversy as John F. Kennedy. His assassination in Dallas on November 22, 1963, marked not just the abrupt end of a presidency, but the beginning of a modern era of skepticism, a time when the public began to question the hidden levers of power and the cost of knowing too much. There are those who suggest that Kennedy's fate was not just the result of political ambition or Cold War intrigue, but something far deeper, a collision with secrets so profound they lay beneath the surface of even the most classified briefings. Stories circulate, whispered on the margins of official history, that during his presidency, Kennedy stumbled upon truths not meant to be shared with the world. Perhaps he learned the full scope of extraterrestrial encounters buried in the files of intelligence agencies. Perhaps he uncovered the reach of shadowy financial networks operating above the laws passed by Congress and beyond the scrutiny of journalists. Perhaps he saw the blueprints of weapons so advanced, their existence would upend the balance of power overnight. Or perhaps he realized that real authority did not reside in the Oval Office, but in alliances and organizations so secretive they answer to no nation, only to their own perpetuation. These theories, however unproven, are not born in a vacuum. They arise from an undercurrent of unease, a growing suspicion that the world is not as transparent as it seems. Kennedy, for all his flaws and political calculations, appeared to some as a leader on the verge of breaking with tradition. He spoke of a United States that could transcend perpetual conflict, that could lead not through dominance or fear, but through example and courage. He challenged his fellow citizens to set aside the comfort of old rivalries and imagine a future where secrecy gave way to openness, where hope triumphed over dread. It is this vision, more than any single policy or speech, that has fueled decades of speculation. Because history has shown us, time and again, that those who threaten entrenched power, who seek to shine light into the darkest corners, often pay the highest price. The Kennedy assassination thus stands as both a tragedy and a warning, that the pursuit of truth, especially in the halls of power, is fraught with peril. But what are the lessons for the generations that have come since? What wisdom can be drawn from the loss of a leader whose life and death remain shrouded in unanswered questions? First, there is the lesson that power, for all its allure, is dangerous. It is not simply the capacity to make decisions or command armies, but the ability to shape narratives, to decide which truths see the light of day and which are buried in silence. Kennedy's death reminds us that the pursuit of power often collides with the pursuit of truth, and that the two are rarely aligned. Second, there is the lesson that truth itself is never static, never complete. The official story, no matter how carefully constructed, is only as strong as the questions it can withstand. When doors are closed, when evidence is withheld, when contradictions are ignored, the foundation of trust erodes. Justice delayed or denied does not only wound those directly affected, it undermines the legitimacy of every institution built upon it. Most importantly, there is the lesson that the act of questioning, of refusing to accept easy answers, is not a threat to democracy, but its very lifeblood. The assassination of John F. Kennedy challenges every citizen to resist complacency, to look beyond the surface, and to demand that the truth be allowed to speak, however uncomfortable or disruptive it may be. Silence, in the end, is far more dangerous than any question that might be asked. And yet, amid the tragedy, there is also hope. Kennedy's vision did not die with him. He inspired a nation to reach for the impossible, to send astronauts to the moon, to fight poverty, to embrace peace over war. These dreams, interrupted though they may have been by gunfire in Dallas, were not destroyed. They live on in the aspirations of each new generation. Every young person who refuses to accept the world as it is, who imagines how it could be better, is an heir to that unfinished legacy. The story of John F. Kennedy is not only about the man, but about the ideals he championed. A world where fear does not dictate policy, where the first response to crisis is not violence but dialogue, where secrecy is the exception, not the rule, where the dignity of every human being is recognized and the possibility of progress is never dismissed as naive. Near the end of his life, Kennedy spoke words that now seem to echo across the decades, a challenge addressed not only to his own generation, but to all those who would come after. He said, "A nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people." With these words, he distilled the essence of democracy, the belief that the people, when given all the facts, can be trusted to make their own judgments. It is a radical notion, and one that remains contested to this day. Kennedy's message was not about any single issue or controversy. It was about the very nature of self-government, about the necessity of openness, of debate, of the willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. It was a call to courage, directed not only at leaders but at citizens everywhere. For democracy is not maintained by the vigilance of the powerful, but by the persistent questioning of the governed. As we reflect on the end of this story, we must recognize that the story itself is not truly over. The questions raised by Kennedy's life and death, about secrecy, about power, about the right to know, are as relevant now as they were in 1963. Each time someone chooses to question the official version, to search for answers in the face of silence, the spirit of that lost leader endures. Every conversation sparked, every demand for transparency, every refusal to let uncomfortable truths be forgotten, is a small victory for the values he held dear. John F. Kennedy was taken from the world too soon, his promise unfulfilled, his legacy contested. Yet the dream he articulated, a world governed by hope rather than fear, by openness rather than secrecy, by the courage to ask questions rather than the comfort of silence, remains within our grasp. It is not the property of any one generation or political movement, but a challenge passed down like a torch, waiting to be picked up anew. The final lesson, then, is this. We are not mere spectators to history. We are its authors. The decisions we make, the questions we ask, the truths we demand, these shape the world as surely as any law or election. Each of us, in our own way, carries a piece of that unfinished vision. The responsibility to seek truth, to resist fear, to strive for a better future, belongs not to the few, but to all. As the echoes of Kennedy's words continue to reverberate, let us remember that the struggle for openness, for justice, for the right to know, is never over. It is renewed every day in every act of inquiry, every refusal to be silenced. The dream he left behind is not a relic of the past, but a blueprint for the future. So, as you reflect on these chapters, consider what role you will play. Will you accept the world as it is, or will you, like Kennedy, dare to imagine what it could become? Will you be content with comfortable answers, or will you risk asking the questions that matter? Will you settle for secrecy, or will you insist on the freedom to seek the truth, no matter how inconvenient? The choice is yours, as it was his. And in that choice lies the hope of all who believe that the future can be brighter than the past. For in the end, the dream that Kennedy cherished, the dream of a world governed not by fear but by hope, belongs not just to history but to each of us. It is ours to protect, to nurture, and when necessary, to fight for, forever.